Emily Grace Monroe was crowned prom queen under a sky full of stars. But just 23 minutes later she was found covered in blood, standing over her best friend's lifeless body, with no memory of what happened. Was she a killer, or someone's perfectly designed weapon? Emily Grace Monroe had imagined her prom night 1,000 times. In each version, she stood under glittering lights, her champagne gown flowing like water, tiara nestled in her hair, cameras flashing as she smiled with perfect ease. That fantasy had carried her through the stress of high school, the whispering classmates, the pressure of always being perfect, and for one fleeting moment on May 17, 2019, it seemed like the dream had finally come true. The gym was packed with sparkling gowns and sharp tuxedos, laughter echoing off the decorated walls. Music thumped in her chest as students danced under string lights and silver balloons. When they called her name, she had glided to the stage, breathless, heart pounding with disbelief and pride. The crown felt heavier than she thought it would, but the cheers made her feel light. Emily smiled for the photos, even as something cold stirred in the back of her mind, something she couldn't name. A shadow, perhaps, or a flicker of something half-remembered. By 11 p.m., the air inside the gym was thick with perfume, sweat, and spilled soda. Emily stepped out to the back exit to get some air. The parking lot shimmered with quiet, distant streetlights, and the night carried that strange warmth spring evenings sometimes do, humid, soft, and heavy. She pulled her heels off and held them in one hand. Her other hand brushed against her chest, as if to calm a rising panic that she didn't understand. That's when Caitlin appeared, her former best friend, the one she hadn't spoken to in nearly 3 months, since the fallout. Their last words to each other were sharp, venomous. Rumors had followed. Some said Caitlin had leaked Emily's private messages. Others whispered that Emily had stolen Caitlin's boyfriend. The truth was tangled, like everything else in high school. Yet, that night, Caitlin had walked toward her with a strange softness in her face. Neither of them spoke. There was no apology, no confrontation, just silence. Emily remembered feeling like her skin had gone cold, even as her face stayed flushed from dancing. The two of them stood there for a while, watching nothing in particular. Emily thought of the time they had once shared a diary, passed notes in the hallway, planned each other's futures. All of it felt far away now, like it had happened to someone else entirely. At 11:18 p.m., they walked behind the gym together. That much was on camera. What happened next was a blur Emily couldn't retrieve. Her mind was a blank page smeared with static, but the physical world told a story her memory refused. At 11:41 p.m., a teacher on parking lot duty found her standing still, her prom dress soaked in blood, her tiara slightly crooked, her hands trembling so hard they could barely hold anything. Next to her lay the knife, gleaming, smeared, undeniable. Caitlin's body was sprawled on the ground, her corsage crushed beneath her, her eyes open in a still stare that seemed to accuse. Emily didn't run, she didn't scream, she didn't even cry. As the paramedics arrived and someone gently took her arm to lead her away, she whispered only one thing, though no one knew what she meant. She said, "This wasn't supposed to happen again." Again. That word sent quiet shockwaves through the people who heard it. Her mother, arriving minutes later, collapsed on the pavement. Teachers exchanged glances. Police officers tightened their jaws. And Emily? She sat in the back of the cruiser, watching the night through the window like it belonged to someone else. Somewhere, buried beneath the noise, her thoughts kept repeating the same fragmented question. If I didn't do this, then who did? The tiara slipped from her head as the car drove off, landing in the grass without a sound. No one noticed it was missing. The police station smelled like paper, coffee, and something sterile, like the air had been wiped clean of comfort. Emily sat on the cold metal bench, hands clasped tightly in her lap, still in her blood-soaked prom dress. Detectives paced behind one-way glass. Officers whispered. Phones rang. But Emily heard none of it. Her world was muted, like she was underwater, and everything outside her mind was a blurry distortion. Her lips were chapped, her mascara had smudged, her knuckles were white from how hard she was holding herself together. The minutes between 11:18 and 11:41, that was all anyone wanted to know about. That tiny window of time, that dark stretch of 23 minutes. But for her it didn't exist. It was like her brain had locked it in a box and thrown away the key. She tried so hard to force herself to remember, to rewind, to see what happened when she followed Caitlin behind the gym. She remembered walking. She remembered the sound of Caitlin's shoes on the gravel, the moonlight making silver puddles on the ground. But after that, nothing. Just blankness. The footage was shown to her. She watched herself on screen. Two girls walking off together, shadows bending around them. No struggle, no tension. She had looked calm. Caitlin had even smiled at something. That image twisted in Emily's stomach like broken glass. The next footage was still, her dress stained, her face pale, her arms hanging down, useless. Caitlin no longer beside her, but beneath her. The lead detective, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes, had sat across from Emily for hours. No yelling, no accusations, just a steady voice, asking the same questions in different ways, hoping something would break loose from Emily's silence. But how could she speak about what she didn't remember? She wanted to say something, anything, to explain herself, to defend her name, to cry, to scream. But every time she opened her mouth, nothing came out. Just air and shame and fear. And worse, something darker that curled at the edge of her thoughts. Doubt. She kept asking herself if there was some part of her that could have done this. Maybe she had snapped. Maybe some black storm inside her had taken over. Maybe there was a version of herself she didn't know, one that was buried under years of pressure and secrets and expectations. She looked down at her hands. There were faint streaks of blood in the lines of her palms. Not her blood. Caitlin's. That thought made her stomach turn. She clenched her fingers shut, as if hiding the evidence from herself could make it disappear. A forensics officer entered the room quietly and handed the detective a report. The woman's face changed. Not shock, confusion. She leaned closer to Emily. "I'm right-handed," she whispered. The detective nodded slowly. "We know." That should have been a relief. It should have made her feel like she was being lifted from the pit she was in. But it didn't. It just made the fog thicker. If she didn't kill Caitlin, then someone else had. But who? There was no one else on the footage. No other prints. No footsteps. No witnesses. Outside, the sky began to lighten. Another day starting, while her world was ending. And still, the 23 missing minutes sat like a stone in her chest, cold, silent, and unforgiving. Thousands of miles away, beneath a clouded Manchester sky, an old man sat in his study, staring at a photograph that hadn't left his desk in years. It was faded now, the edges curled, the colors losing their fight with time. Detective Inspector Harold Whitmore had worked hundreds of cases in his career, but the Rosie Ashcroft case had never left him. He had retired shortly after it collapsed in court, worn down by the weight of evidence that never made sense. Now, in the stillness of his later years, he had accepted that there were things he would never understand, but when he saw the headline from New York, "Prom Queen covered in blood after friend found dead," his breath caught in his throat. The face staring from the article was one he recognized, even beneath the new name, even with longer hair and an American smile. Rosie. She had changed her name to Emily Grace Monroe. Moved across the Atlantic. Started again. He read every detail with trembling hands. The missing time, the bloody dress, the knife, the lack of witnesses, the emotionless stare. He didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in patterns. His heart raced as memories flooded back of a courtroom filled with media, of experts debating Rosie's mental health, of her claiming she didn't remember anything. of the public turning against her when she walked free. The evidence had been too fractured to hold. It's not the first time. He remembered brushing it off as stress, a child trying to sound dramatic. But what if it hadn't been that at all? He pulled out the old case file from the bottom drawer of his desk. Dust clung to the folder like guilt. Inside were photos, interviews, forensic reports. The layout of the school prom in Manchester. The location of the body behind the sports hall. Rosie's bloodied hands. Her stunned expression. And buried near the back, a photograph from the crime scene, showing something few had noticed. The victim, Rosie's best friend Natalie Haynes, had been wearing a charm bracelet. But now, Whitmore didn't waste another second. He packed the files, the drive, and the photo, and made the call he'd been dreading for years to a contact in digital forensics, who still owed him a favor. Emily's face haunted him now, just as Rosie's had before. And for the first time in years, Whitmore felt fear, not of a killer, but of what might be buried inside the mind of a girl who wore a crown one night and forgot everything after. Detective Inspector Harold Whitmore had always believed in facts, in footprints, in blood patterns, in cold evidence that spoke louder than emotions. But as he sat across from a senior officer at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, staring at dual case files that mirrored each other like distorted reflections, he realized this wasn't the kind of case that facts could solve alone. There was something underneath it all, a current pulling them in, and none of them could see where it led. Emily Grace Monroe, Rosie Ashcroft. 2 names, 1 girl, 2 best friends dead, 2 prom nights, both ending in blood. Both times she'd been found standing alone, confused, silent, dressed like a doll in a horror movie. Emily wasn't speaking much during the psychiatric evaluations. Her lawyers had pushed for her to be transferred to a secure hospital after the New York incident. There, doctors tried to untangle her mind with quiet voices and gentle questions, but it was like her thoughts were hiding behind locked doors, doors she was afraid to open even for herself. When she did speak, it came in fragments, strange phrases. One night, a nurse overheard her murmuring in her sleep, "They only love you when you're perfect. If you crack, they crawl in." The FBI brought in a trauma specialist. After several sessions, they found signs of dissociative identity disorder, though not fully confirmed. There were missing chunks of time, long lapses in memory that didn't align with ordinary blackouts, more like someone else had taken the wheel while she watched from the back seat. Then came the discovery that changed everything. She raised the knife with her left hand, but the movement wasn't clumsy, it was deliberate, robotic, almost practiced. And then, something even stranger. In the corner of the frame, nearly out of view, was a light, a flicker, like the reflection of a screen, a digital pulse, as if someone was watching them. Investigators scoured the metadata. Hidden within the footage were traces of code. A remote signal embedded within a messaging app Rosie had downloaded just weeks before the prom. A messaging app traced back to a shell company in Eastern Europe. That app had also been found on Emily's phone in New York. The implications sank in slowly, like poison. What if Emily hadn't acted alone? What if her behavior had been triggered, manipulated by someone else, using psychological techniques and digital cues she didn't even know were affecting her? The thought was horrifying. Because if that was true, then she wasn't just a suspect. She was a puppet. Someone out there had studied her, found her weaknesses, slipped inside the cracks of her mind and taken control. Harold Whitmore stood at the window of the FBI's evidence room, hands trembling against the sill. He had chased evil for decades, but this felt different, colder, smarter, invisible. And it had already killed twice. The silence in the FBI's underground cyber unit was suffocating. Screens glowed blue in the dim room, casting ghostly light on the agents' faces as they sifted through lines of code, profiles, metadata, and shadowed digital trails that twisted like spiderwebs across continents. The profiler assigned to Emily's case, Agent Dana Prescott, hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours, Her office was littered with photos, diagrams, handwritten notes, with scribbled arrows, and a long line of string connecting events on the wall like a crime scene map no one could understand yet. She was starting to feel like the deeper they dug, the further the ground shifted beneath them. The breakthrough didn't come from blood or hair or fibers. It came from a username. A tech analyst cross-referenced a suspicious conversation on the app found on Emily's phone, with older encrypted logs taken from a defunct chat room used by deep web manipulation forums. A pattern emerged. The same handle had appeared years earlier. Cold-Lolic 13, whoever they were, they had been posting theories on emotional control, mental conditioning, and neurological interference through audio-visual triggers. Most had written them off as fringe nonsense, but suddenly, it all seemed terrifyingly real. The profiler's hands shook slightly as she turned over one of the logs. Weeks before Natalie Haynes's murder in Manchester, ColdLogic 13 had posted a detailed case study of a high-achieving girl, emotionally isolated, under intense social pressure. The details were alarmingly specific. It matched Rosie's profile, almost exactly. Then came another post in early 2019, describing a renewed experiment in a different country, a different subject. That second subject was clearly Emily. Dana tried to imagine the mindset of someone who would plan something like this, not just a murder, but a psychological labyrinth designed to trap someone inside themselves. This wasn't just about control, it was about testing limits, seeing how far a mind could be pushed before it shattered. They traced the server, somewhere in Belarus, then bounced through Bulgaria, then gone. Whoever was behind it knew how to stay hidden, but a few careless traces of metadata led to a cluster of accounts. The same VPN, the same routing habits, the same patterns of online activity. The victims were lured, subtly isolated, and emotionally entangled. Then they were suddenly distant, withdrawn, even fearful, but never quite understanding why. Dana realized the horror of it all. The real predator hadn't touched anyone. They hadn't even entered the country. They had whispered through screens, rewired emotions with expertly timed messages, planted triggers disguised as music, photos, and jokes. Someone had watched her, studied her, and broken her from the inside out. And the worst part? Emily still didn't know she had been a weapon. Used, pointed, fired. And now, as the clock ticked forward, Dana knew they were no longer chasing a girl who might be a murderer. They were chasing someone who knew how to create them. The court had gone silent. Not in the usual way, where people held their breath waiting for the verdict, but in the way that comes when the air has already been pulled out of the room. It was the stillness of disbelief, of realization. Emily Grace Monroe sat at the defense table, not in an orange jumpsuit, but in a pale gray dress. Her wrists trembled as she gripped a paper cup of water, untouched. She hadn't cried during the trial, not once, but her eyes looked hollow, like something had been pulled from behind them, leaving only a shell. The doctors said her memory of the second murder, Caitlin's, had not returned, not even fragments. No jury had been selected. No one in the courtroom wanted a trial anymore. The facts had outgrown the system built to hold them. But the word that echoed in the minds of those in the room was not treatment. It was containment. Emily didn't flinch when the decision was read. She didn't ask what would happen to her. She didn't even look at her lawyer. She stared straight ahead, into nothing, not out of defiance, not guilt, just emptiness. Somewhere inside her she had once been a girl who loved books, danced in her bedroom, dreamt of college and bright futures. That girl was hard to see now. The weight of 2 lives lost hung over her like a fog that never lifted. She had spent hours in the hospital rooms before the trial, trying to make sense of who she was. The doctors told her that trauma had broken her mind into pieces, that someone had exploited those cracks. She had been manipulated, remotely triggered, psychologically stripped of her ability to control her own actions. And yet, none of it gave her peace. The question that haunted her wasn't, did I kill them? It was there a part of me that wanted to? That doubt was worse than a sentence. Across the world, the investigation into the digital predator continued. Cold Logic 13 had vanished again. The servers were scrubbed clean. The trail was cold. A few suspects were questioned. One was found dead in an abandoned apartment in Romania, suicide, they claimed. But no one was arrested, no one faced trial. Justice, in the traditional sense, would never come. The story of Emily Grace Monroe spread across headlines, documentaries, podcasts. People debated whether she was guilty or a victim, whether she should be pitied or feared, whether she was telling the truth or hiding something darker inside. And in the center of all that noise, Emily remained quiet. Years passed, seasons blurred through the locked windows of her psychiatric wing. Sometimes she painted, often she just stared. A nurse once asked her what she was thinking. She replied, softly, "I keep dreaming about a door that doesn't open." No one ever wore that crown again at Westchester High. The prom was cancelled indefinitely. The tiara from that night, crusted with dried blood, was sealed in an evidence bag and stored in a federal archive. It was never claimed, and deep in the silence of her room, Emily sometimes placed her hands together like she was holding something invisible.